welcome back to the 20 Sessions. My name is Ebony Harris.
And I'm Elisa Bokeen, and we are two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on both
Both sides
sides
of the
of
couch.
the couch.
Your song. Welcome back. We are back again for another podcast. We appreciate you for joining us. Today we're going to talk about what was your post? What was the exact wording of your post? What we're
I
attracted
said,
to?
yeah, what did I say? Hold, please.
I have it. I just
I,
thought you knew it, so I wanted you to say
I
it.
said, what we're attracted to isn't always what's best for us, which is so true.
In
So
so
true.
many areas of life, but definitely relationship wise. Just
Yeah.
because you're attracted to it doesn't mean that's the right fit. Or
Right.
the
Just
right.
because all the bells and the whistles and the butterflies are showing up because you're attracted to something, it does not mean that that is an indicator that this is what's best for you.
Right. Right.
Feels good,
It
not
feels
always the best for
good.
us.
You're excited, you have chemistry, but a lot of times that chemistry is because it's being triggered by your previous stuff that you
Right.
haven't resolved.
Right.
So
Exactly.
we're gonna chat about how it happens, why it happens, and what you can do about it. If you find yourself continuously attracted to people or environments that are just not the best for you, understanding more about where that comes from can be really helpful in like stopping the pattern, changing the pattern, not being a part of the pattern, all of that.
That's
So
right. Breaking the
breaking the
pattern.
pattern. Thank you. That's the word.
Yes.
That is the word. So how does it happen? Why? What's happening with us that makes us actually attracted to things that aren't good for us?
Right. Well, it starts really early on. It really starts in our early childhood experiences,
Mm-hmm.
um, our early relationships, and most often those relationships are with our caretakers, our parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
This begins to form how we view relationships, our interactions with them, how we related to them, how they related to one another. This begins to form a pattern in our brains. And what we know is that our brains love patterns. Our
Mm-hmm.
brains love patterns. And so we begin to shape, like our filter begins to get shaped at that time as to how we view relationships, how we view love, how we feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I would say what we crave for at that time. I always tell my clients, even the most well intentioned parents, they cannot meet all our needs. And they shouldn't meet all our needs, because if our parents
Right.
met all our needs, we would never leave home.
Right.
Right. So even the most well intentioned parents will drop the ball somewhere. And so as adults, we kind of have to pick up the ball where they left off.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these experiences, and then again, how we saw our parents interact, whether we saw them interact, this begins to shape our own filter of relationships of love and how we feel loved and how we love others.
Yeah, definitely. We have, these experiences growing up. We have these moments where we see either how our parents relate with each other or relate with other people. We also have moments where we see how they treat us, and all of that impacts how you look at a relationship. And so if something if you only saw certain types of relationships, maybe they weren't the healthiest, or maybe it seemed like they had a healthy relationship. I've heard this before where it's like my parents, like I had a great, wonderful dad, but my parents' relationship wasn't great. Right. And
Right.
so you have to so you're looking for someone that's like your dad, but then you realize that that may not be the best partner for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we're just we're I know a lot of people have heard you date your parent, you date your dad or your mom or whatever, or you turn into your dad or your mom. And like you said, that's just because this is how our brain works. Like our brain is looking at what was modeled for us. Our brain is looking at what was in front of us, and you can't always conceive what you don't see. And so if you haven't had the healthiest examples, or if you just haven't necessarily seen what that looks like or seen something different, then it makes it really hard for you to be able to even conceive and like try to have a relationship in a different manner than what you've already had. Um, so,
Yeah, I think that's one of, you saying that, like, you look for your mom, you look for your dad. I think sometimes that's really hard for people
mhm.
to relate to because, they'll say, I'm not attracted to my parents. No, not in a sexual way. We're not saying
Right.
that. What we're saying is the interactions are familiar.
Yeah.
You know what to do with it. And a lot of times I'll find when I do this work with my clients, what we'll find is not only the positive traits, right? So not
Yeah.
they'll understand the positive traits, but the negative traits are like, why would I be attracted to negative traits?
Right. I hated
Why
that
would
about my
I go
mom.
looking?
Yeah. But it's
So
familiar.
why do we do that,
Yeah.
Ebony? Why are we also attracted to the negative traits?
It like to what you just said, like it's a familiar feeling. There is some
Mm-hmm.
comfort in this pattern that you've been in. It's some comfort in this cycle that you had your whole life when you were younger. As you became an adult, as you started dating, it probably seems like you date the same type of people. It feels, and people hate when I say it's comfortable. It's like, I'm not comfortable. And it's like, well, it's more comfortable than the unknown, right? So maybe you
Right.
don't enjoy it, but there's familiarity. There's some level of like, I know what to expect in this situation, even if I want something different.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy for us um to do what we've always done, and to find ourselves in situations that we've always found ourselves in. And what you said about the positive and negative traits, that's so true, because I tell, when I work through family of origin stuff with my clients, I often tell them, like, the positive, like, we know, like, yes, my dad was a hard worker, my dad was this, like, that's what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to make, right? But then when it's like, oh, but he also wasn't very attentive, and so
Mm-hmm.
what I say is, a lot of times what happens is, that's what creates that chemistry, right? Because you can meet people that have like these positive characteristics, but there's something that's like, oh, I don't know, we don't have chemistry, or I'm not as attracted, and da 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 da. Then you start to realize, like, oh, when I feel chemistry, it's like, what about this is making that chemistry come? It's those negative traits that we're attracted to. It's
Right.
that familiarity. It's that, like, this is something that I feel comfortable with in some way, even if you're not 100% sure what that is, that it's exactly those negative traits.
Yeah, I always tell people when we meet that person, it's like, oh, this feels like home. It's that sense of
Literally.
I've been here before. I know
Right,
what this is.
right.
And I think what is important to remember is that some of these negative traits that we're labeling negative traits, they don't show up negative, right? So I
Mm,
always give the example of, let's say you meet somebody who, when you meet them, they're very cool and collected, and you're like, oh, he was so cool, he was so collected, and so such a good listener, just listen
mm-hmm.
to me talking, and nothing seemed to rattle him. And then you get in a relationship with this person, right? Because they've got all those positive
Yep.
qualities too. And then a year down the line or so, it becomes, well, you never say nothing, and you're
I don't even know
aloof,
if you care.
and you
Right.
don't even care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All those things that you liked.
So they don't show up like that, and we're drawn to him, and that part of our brain that thinks, okay, I'm gonna figure this out this time around, is lit up.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we have those interactions and they don't go the way we wanted to, or it continues to go in the same way. Like, if you had a pattern with a parent that wasn't as consistent, right? When we
Mm-hmm.
get older, we often are trying to, like, fill in the gaps. We're trying to, like,
Right.
fix whatever we missed growing up. And so if I had a parent that wasn't consistent, and then I meet people and I date people that aren't very consistent, I'm hoping that they will love me enough to be consistent for me, because that's what I wish I had
Right.
gotten from my parent.
Right.
So oftentimes it's us, when, or even, I say, we talk about family of origin because I think it's extremely important. Some people are like, nothing happened in my childhood. My childhood was great. So sure. But
Mm-hmm.
even if you start to see in your first relationship, you've had something happen, and in your next relationship, the same thing has happened. Like, there's something there where you're trying to, like, redeem yourself. This is going to be a big stretch, but it just reminded me. Did you watch, I'm assuming that was like the TLC documentary, like, years and years ago. And Chili was saying how she had had an abortion by Dallas Austin. And she was like,
Uh-huh.
the only way to make that right was to have a kid with him, because it felt like this is me like
Mm,
fixing the fact that I had an abortion by this man.
yeah.
And so I feel like that's sometimes what our brain does. It's like we've had these situations, and it's like the only way to make this right is I have to keep dating the same type of person in hopes that they will actually love me enough to do what the last person didn't know what my parent
Right.
didn't. It's like
Right. Right.
it's just a
Right.
cycle.
Yeah, which that's kind of what segues us into why do we repeat these patterns?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're talking about, so there is Harville Hendricks talks about this. If anybody's heard of is Harville a psychotherapist? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I believe so.
So Harville Hendricks talks about this. His book, Getting the Love You Want.
Mm-hmm.
And his theory is that the needs that we didn't get met as a child, that there's a part of us that seeks to remedy that in
Mm-hmm.
our adulthood. Because as children, we're powerless, right? Like we couldn't get what we needed
Mm-hmm.
from our caretakers. And again, this is not to blame our caretakers or to judge them, because again, even the most well-intentioned parents cannot meet
Right.
all our needs,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you have more than one child. Your time becomes limited, your attention is limited, so lots of reasons why you might not get a need met. So Harville, the whole imago theory and all of that is that you grow up and then you're seeking, just like you said, someone to remedy with this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now with this person we're kind of more on this equal playing field. I'll be able to get that love that I really needed
Mm-hmm.
growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And some, I will say this, sometimes that can work when you have two people who are really committed to the process, right? If you have another partner who is very self-aware also and is also doing their work,
Mm-hmm.
it may be that you are able to do this.
Right.
It just so happens that most of us are not that self-aware when this is
Right.
happening.
Right. Yeah. And that's, you can't rely on that. You should be doing
Mhm.
it your work anyway. So we can move into like what can you do about it, right? So once you're seeing these patterns, once you're recognizing why you're doing it, because you are trying to remedy, childhood wounds, you are trying to, it does feel familiar. What can be done to like make sure that you're not continuing to attract the wrong person or continuing to be attracted to something that's not right for you.
Right. Well, I
Um,
think that's the key. You are attracted to the
yes.
wrong.
Oh, I say that. I love my favorite question now is why do I attract unavailable men? And I'm like, because you're attracted
Right.
to unavailable men.
Right.
The reality is you
Because I
attract all
love them.
men, right? I love them.
I
You
love
attract
unavailable
all
men.
men, but you are attracted to unavailable men. So this is why you
Yeah.
keep finding that in your life. And once you start to take responsibility for that instead of saying that, because when we say, why do I attract? It's like you have this magical force field that they're coming to. Like,
Right.
no,
Right.
all these
Right.
different guys are attracted to you, but the ones that pique your interest are the unavailable
They're the
ones.
best looking. They're the most.
They're
So why do I
dangerous.
love it? Right. So I love unavailable men because there's a part of me that thinks this unavailable man will be available for me
For
to
me, though.
prove that I am worthy and I've been the special one and I'm
Mm-hmm.
lovable. Like I will be the one to make him available.
Yeah.
How much love I pour into him.
Right. Right.
This is how all great love stories begin in Hollywood, because then at
Right,
the
right in
end he
Hollywood,
does
lots of
become available.
drama, lots of, but then it's like, but you love me enough to fix all of those things and be there for
Right.
me.
You complete me. Like, yeah, yeah, whatever. Let's get back to the real.
Right, right. So the first thing that you want to do is be aware. And I know you were talking about exploring experiences. So you,
Yeah. So one of the most important things is to explore your family of origin experiences. You mentioned this before. A lot of times people will say, "Well, everything was good. No, my parents were great. They
mm-hmm,
did everything, for me." And that's not to say that they didn't. Again, this is not a judgment on folks.
yeah,
Um, again, if you're human and your parents were human too, somewhere there was something dropped. And so it's important for us to go back and really explore our family of origin patterns. And it may not even just stop at mom and dad or current caretakers. What happened with grandma and grandpa, right? Like, because again, these patterns are often passed down generation after generation. And so it's really important for us to go back, explore our early childhood experiences could have really had an impact on us. So think back to some of the most memorable experiences that you had growing up, right? So how did you know you were loved when you were a
Mm-hmm.
kid?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like how did you know you were loved? How did your parents set boundaries? Because that's another big part of love. So how did they set boundaries? Did they set boundaries?
Right.
Were the boundaries too rigid? And how did they nurture you? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how did they care for your needs? How attentive were they to your needs? How important were your needs
Right.
in the family? So explore those early family experiences, family of origin experiences. And I would suggest you do this work with a therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what can often happen is we need to start processing some of this stuff. Sometimes you'll begin to access memories that you hadn't thought about before,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
that you'll say, you know what, I never connected that. And that can bring up some stuff that you may need to process in therapy.
Yeah. And what you said earlier, I think is I just want to reiterate. Sometimes when we do the family of origin work, the concern is that we are judging how our parents, how good of a job they did.
Exactly.
And that's not the goal. The goal is just for you to understand and be aware. It's not saying that what they did was good, bad, wrong, right. They did the best they could. And but what happens is, like you said, we always end up, everybody has stuff. Like, it just, even if you had the perfect family, you will have stuff, because now you probably think you have to be perfect, right? Something comes from,
Exactly.
so being
Yeah.
aware of that is not a criticism on their parenting. And then along with that, I think it's important to understand, like, what are some things that you wish you had gotten that you didn't get, right? And
Exactly.
so, if I wish I had more privacy, how does that then impact your
Mhm.
relationships? If I wish I had more attention or whatever, like, so being aware of the amazing things that our parents did, and being aware of, like, when I was younger, I did want this. And again, we have to remember that when we're looking at it as an adult, we sometimes justify it, like, but I understand now, my mom worked two jobs, that, and like,
Right.
of course you did, of course you
Yes.
now with your adult brain get it, but your child brain
Right.
didn't, and that has
Right.
impacted you.
Right. Because how did you explain it to yourself when you were a kid?
Right.
And
Right.
that's what's most important, because that's the part of us that often needs healing, is the part of us that interpreted a different way. So if
Definitely.
I had a parent who was very cold and distant, and I didn't know that they were suffering from depression,
Mm-hmm.
I may have interpreted that as, what did I do wrong? Or maybe if
Right.
I just do all these other things. And so that again is why it's so important for us to go back and think about those experiences as a child. And
Right.
I think to kind of piggyback off of what you said about um part of why I do think a lot of times people will struggle with this, especially if I've noticed this a lot when people had grew up in single parent
Mm-hmm.
households,
Mm-hmm.
where they saw one parent who was busting their ass,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then maybe the other one wasn't as present. Is they struggle to really acknowledge this stuff because they feel like they're being disloyal.
Yep.
And I always tell people, like, again, this is not a judgment. I like to think of it as like a research project where
Mm-hmm.
you're going back and you're gathering data about, how did I get to be here? Well, let's look at all of the experiences. Let's look at what science says of
Mm-hmm.
relationships and
Mm-hmm.
how that may have impacted me, so we can get an objective view. But then with this information, you can now move differently in relationships. You can now have more greater self-awareness. So all of this is not to bash your parents, it's to empower you in your
Right.
decision making, so you are more conscious in your decision making.
Right. And I think as you become aware and as you learn about what are these different areas that, like, I was lacking, or that maybe needs healing, you can focus your energy on that, right? So let me
Right.
focus on healing myself so that I'm not seeking healing in others. Often, just like you said
Mhm.
earlier, it can happen, right? We're not saying never do you ever find a relationship where it can feel healing and there can be some positivity, but you don't want to be seeking that out. You don't want to be on a constant chase of who is someone that is familiar so that they can fix whatever is happening internally. And so in learning and talking with a therapist about those family of origin experiences, it also gives you an opportunity to kind of say like, okay, but what did I need? And what
Exactly.
did I wish I had? And how do I give that to myself? And in doing that, then it makes it so much, it it just makes the process of dating and relationships, all of that, completely different, because now you're not seeking that, and now you're not looking for these traits, or you're not as attracted. It truly will change your attraction once you've kind of healed some of those
Yeah.
parts.
And it could also be that if you stay attracted, you at least know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I already know
Mm-hmm.
this is the type of person that I'm drawn to because
Mm-hmm.
of all of my stuff. But I love what you're saying is that you also learn how to meet these needs for yourself, which is so important. And I think that's one thing that often will frustrate people because they're like, well, I want a partner that's going to be able to do this also. Like, yes, we're not saying you have to exclude that. But if what I really needed in childhood was I don't know, like let's say more attention. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how do I give myself attention? Well, you give yourself attention by minding what it is that you need on a regular
Mm-hmm.
basis, monitoring yourself. This is what self-care is, right? Like that
Right.
ongoing monitoring of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. What do I need? Right. So you learn to give that more to yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you will find yourself in relationships and be like, well, this person doesn't, they're not attentive. They're not there for me. But how are you not showing up for you becomes the question. This
Right.
is not easy work and it's not always fun work, but it is worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And especially once you get to that other side, when you feel like, oh, this is what healthy feels like, or
Mhm.
this is what
Mhm.
healing feels like Elisa says, healing is messy, but yeah, it's definitely worth it.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Mhm.
so that is why you may be attracted to what isn't always best for you, and hopefully that's helpful as far as like what steps you can take to be aware and to recognize where it comes from, and even how to kind of move past that. So, all right.
Yes.
Anything else want to add?
That's it. Just, be conscious in your love seeking. I love this. One of my favorite quotes is from a Stephen Marley song. And he says, stand in love, don't fall in love. And I love
Mm,
that. This
mhm.
idea that I'm going to be grounded and centered in love versus love being this state where I completely lose myself.
Right.
Let it be where you really find yourself and really stay centered and see what that feels like.
Yeah, awesome. Thank y'all for listening and watching. Check us out at melaninandmentalhealth.com, across social media, Melanin and Mental Health, Melanin Health on Twitter. Make sure that you subscribe and like and all of that for this podcast. Leave reviews, leave topics that you want us to talk about. Head on over to melaninandmentalhealth.com to find a directory. Why am I not able to talk today? To find our directory of clinicians of color, to find the merchandise, the dope merchandise, and to find a previous podcast. And yeah, I think that's it. So we'll talk to y'all next
All
week.
right, folks. Bye.
Bye.